My surgeon parents called me a parasite and kicked me out. 2 weeks later, Forbes exposed my $41.6 million fortune and their world collapsed. "You're a disgrace," my father shouted in front of 16 relatives. Just 2 weeks later, the $185 million valuation of my tech company completely shattered his arrogance and left him desperately trying to repair the damage. My parents publicly disowned me during their extravagant 30th wedding anniversary dinner. Right there in front of our entire extended family, they mocked every decision I had made, labeled me an unemployed parasite, and acted like I was nothing more than a burden. What they didn't realize was that they were throwing a tech founder worth $48 million out of their home. Even more importantly, they had no clue they were about to trigger a chain of events that would completely destroy the flawless, high society reputation they had spent decades building. Original post: my name is Nathan Whitfield, and I'm 26 years old. On October 9th, 2024, at exactly 7:15 that evening, my father transformed what should have been a beautiful celebration of my parents' 30th wedding anniversary into a carefully planned public humiliation. With 16 of our closest relatives watching, he turned the dinner into my eviction. Standing at the head of a massive custom-built mahogany dining table, he raised a shaking finger, pointed straight at the heavy oak front door of our family's Kensington Square mansion, and bellowed, "Get out, and don't ever come back." He laughed at the choices I'd made with my life, called me a complete disgrace, and made sure every person in that room heard every word. The rest of my family simply sat there in cold, approving silence, as if everything happening was perfectly justified. What none of them knew was that they were making one enormous mistake. They believed they were kicking a lazy, unemployed medical school dropout onto the streets. In reality, I was already quietly sitting on a personal net worth of $41.6 million. To understand why my father hated the path I chose so intensely, and why my mother worked so relentlessly to ruin my reputation, you first have to understand the crushing legacy that came with being a Whitfield. In my family, your value as a person came down to one thing and one thing only: whether you wore a spotless white lab coat with a stethoscope around your neck. If you pursued medicine, you earned respect. If you chose anything else, you were considered a lifelong disappointment who brought shame to the family. The Whitfields weren't just a family. We were a dynasty built on scalpels, prestigious medical degrees, and egos so enormous they filled every room. My grandfather had been a legendary cardiothoracic surgeon during the 1970s. He was one of the pioneers who introduced experimental bypass surgeries to Chicago, and his name was still carved into the marble wall of an entire hospital wing decades later. My father, Dr. Marcus Whitfield, followed directly in his footsteps. Through ruthless ambition and relentless politics, he climbed the ranks until he became chief of neurological surgery at one of the top-ranked hospitals in the country, a medical center consistently ranked 4th nationwide. My mother, Dr. Genevieve Whitfield, was an equally respected oncologist with an exclusive client list that included wealthy state senators, powerful CEOs, and old-money socialites who trusted only the best. Growing up, every coffee table in our house was buried under thick, glossy medical journals. In the center of our formal dining room hung a heavy bronze plaque engraved with the words, "Excellence through Science." It wasn't decoration. It was a constant reminder of exactly what was expected from everyone who carried the Whitfield name. As the sons of this medical royalty, my brothers and I weren't encouraged to dream. Our futures had already been planned for us. My older brother Julian, now 35, embraced the family ideology without the slightest hesitation. He became a rising cardiothoracic surgeon, publishing research in major medical journals while carrying himself through the hospital like he already owned the place. He was undeniably brilliant, but he was also painfully arrogant, deeply narcissistic, and almost completely lacking in empathy. My mother never missed an opportunity to brag about him. Whenever she spoke with her wealthy friends, she somehow managed to mention Julian's latest accomplishments, his upcoming promotion, and the enormous salary he was expected to earn, usually several times in the same conversation. My younger brother Preston was 23 and finishing his final exhausting year at Cornell Medical School. He ranked in the top 8% of his class and had already secured one of the most prestigious residency positions available. Unlike Julian, Preston wasn't driven by arrogance. He was driven by fear. Terrified of my father's explosive temper, he kept his head down, buried his anxiety, and followed every instruction without ever questioning it. Then there was me. I was the anomaly, the flaw in the Whitfield blueprint. On March 4th, 2021, halfway through my incredibly demanding third year of medical school, I did something my family considered unforgivable. I walked away. I packed up my textbooks, officially withdrew from every class, and left medical school behind for good. Not once did my parents sit down and ask why I made that decision. They never wondered if I was suffering from burnout, struggling with depression, or realizing that the reality of hospital politics was draining every bit of purpose I had left. Instead, they immediately settled on the explanation that made them feel the best about themselves. I was weak, I was lazy, and unlike my brilliant brothers, I simply wasn't strong enough to survive the pressure. For the next 3 painfully long years, I became little more than a ghost at every required family gathering. During that time, I was guilt-tripped into attending more than 9 separate family dinners, and every single one followed the exact same cruel script, almost as if it had been rehearsed. Julian would spend half the evening describing another complicated surgery he had successfully performed, while soaking up endless praise from everyone around the table. Preston would politely announce whatever academic honor or award he had recently earned. Then, without fail, someone, an aunt, an uncle, or one of my parents' nosy friends, would eventually look across the table at me and ask what I was doing these days. Before I ever had the chance to answer, my mother would flash that perfectly rehearsed, embarrassed smile, casually wave her diamond-covered hand through the air, and dismiss me with the same line every single time. Nathan is still just figuring things out. She always made sure to put extra emphasis on those words, throwing up big, obvious air quotes so everyone around the table would notice. It was passive-aggressive humiliation at its absolute finest, and she had perfected it over the years. Nobody ever stopped to ask what I was actually figuring out while I spent all that time alone in my room. As far as they were concerned, I was just wasting my life and slowly becoming a nobody. What those brilliant doctors never understood was the biggest truth of all. I didn't walk away from medical school because I failed my exams or because I wasn't smart enough to make it. I left because my mind was built for solving complex systems, and I had discovered an entirely different world. It was a world where technology, innovation, and global financial markets created opportunities so enormous that traditional medical salaries and petty hospital politics looked tiny by comparison. While my exhausted classmates were sacrificing their mental and physical health, memorizing all 13 cranial nerves, and spending endless hours dissecting cadavers, I was putting in 16-hour days teaching myself Solidity, the advanced programming language behind blockchain development. While they buried themselves in preparation for medical board exams, I was breaking down sophisticated smart contracts, studying decentralized finance protocols, and analyzing complicated patterns across global markets. When the crypto winter hit in early 2022, I made the biggest gamble of my entire life. Every major news outlet was screaming that digital assets were finished, calling crypto nothing more than a collapsed bubble that would wipe out millions of ordinary investors. I ignored every headline and tuned out all the panic. Instead, I invested exactly $52,000, which represented every dollar I had saved from years of software engineering internships, along with a small but incredibly meaningful inheritance my grandmother had left me before she passed away. I used every penny to buy my first major Bitcoin position at $19,800. That wasn't the end of it. I approached trading with cold discipline, relying on algorithms instead of emotions. By the end of 2023, after countless hours of obsessive market research and uncovering obscure arbitrage opportunities, that original $52,000 had grown into $7.4 million. By the time October 2024 arrived, my diversified investment portfolio had reached an incredible $41.6 million. Even then, I never told my family a single word about any of it. I let them cling to their illusion that they were somehow superior to me. Whenever they looked in my direction, all they saw was a guy who slept until 1 in the afternoon, lived in faded gray sweatpants, and kept a messy bedroom filled with empty coffee cups and tangled charging cables. What they never saw was that I was wide awake at 3 o'clock every morning Eastern Time, actively trading as the Asian markets came online. They also had no idea that I had partnered with a brilliant anonymous developer named Callum to build Vertex Chain, an advanced decentralized security protocol designed to protect multi-million-dollar decentralized finance transactions from sophisticated cyber attacks. My bedroom wasn't some lazy man's cave. It was a fully operational command center. 3 high-resolution curved monitors filled my desk, a top-tier laptop handled the heavy processing, and a massive whiteboard covered with detailed blockchain architecture diagrams stretched across one wall. One rainy afternoon, I overheard my father talking to my mother through the thin drywall separating our rooms. "He sleeps until 1 in the afternoon, Genevieve," he sneered, every word dripping with disgust. What kind of pathetic life is that? The boy has absolutely no ambition. What he didn't know was that I had just spent 20 straight hours in front of those glowing screens, closing a private protocol licensing deal that earned me $365,000 in pure profit in a single day. To my parents and their narrow way of thinking, my room looked like proof that I had completely failed at life. To me, it was where I was building a technological and financial empire from the ground up. Out of everyone in my extended family, only one person ever treated me like an actual human being instead of a failed project. And that was my Uncle Desmond. He was my father's older brother, a 57-year-old retired physician who had been smart enough to leave the toxic hospital world early and actually enjoy his life. Uncle Desmond was the only person who looked beyond the sweatpants and the messy room and asked me about my work with genuine curiosity instead of disguised judgment. I'd tell him bits and pieces about what I was building: fintech, blockchain security, digital asset infrastructure. He didn't fully understand the technical side of it, but he always listened carefully. Then he'd nod, give my shoulder a reassuring pat, and say, "Sounds like you're building something huge, Nathan. Don't let your father wear you down. You've got to follow your own path." Update 1. The countdown to the explosion had officially begun, and my mother was getting ready to light the fuse herself. About 3 painfully long weeks before my parents' anniversary dinner, she did something so unusual that it immediately set off alarm bells in my head. Instead of sending one of her usual cold, commanding text messages, she actually called my personal phone. When I answered, her voice sounded warm, cheerful, and almost painfully sweet. "Nathan, sweetheart," she said, "our 30th wedding anniversary is coming up, and we're having a small family dinner with 16 of the people closest to us. Your father and I would absolutely love for you to be there. It would mean so much to him if the whole family was together." I should have recognized the trap immediately, because I knew exactly how Genevieve Whitfield operated. Whenever she used that sugary, overly affectionate voice, it always meant she wanted an audience for whatever family success she planned to show off next. More than that, she needed me sitting in the room as the perfect contrast to Julian's shining accomplishments. I was supposed to be the dark backdrop that made her golden child look even brighter. "I'll be there, Mom," I replied quietly, keeping every trace of emotion out of my voice. "Wonderful," she answered. And in an instant, her voice snapped right back to its usual sharp, professional, commanding tone. The sweet act disappeared the moment she got exactly what she wanted. 7:30 sharp on October 9th. "Don't be late, Nathan. We're not holding up the caterers because of you." Before I could even respond or say goodbye, she ended the call. On October 9th, I pulled up to my parents' multi-million-dollar mansion in Kensington Square at exactly 7:30 p.m. The entire estate was glowing with expensive ambient lighting and hundreds of candles, giving the place the polished look of a luxury magazine photo shoot. Several high-end catering vans lined the street, illegally parked as crews hurried back and forth carrying polished silver serving trays inside. I climbed the wide marble staircase and rang the doorbell. My mother answered almost immediately, dressed in a designer gown that probably cost more than the average American family spent on 4 years of college tuition. Massive diamonds sparkled around her neck and wrists, catching the light every time she moved. She leaned in and gave me 2 perfectly rehearsed air kisses, carefully making sure her makeup never actually touched my face. "Oh, Nathan, you actually managed to leave the house?" she said with a practiced smile. "Come in." Before I had the chance to look around, she placed a firm hand against my back and subtly steered me past the main dining room. As we walked in, my attention was drawn to the elegant calligraphy seating chart displayed on the marble entry table. The first table, an enormous, custom-built mahogany table sitting proudly in the center of the room, was reserved for what my parents clearly considered the family elite. Their names were all there: my parents, Julian, Preston, both sets of grandparents, 3 aunts, and 2 influential uncles. Then I looked at the second table. It was nothing more than a cramped folding table shoved nearly 20 feet away in the dim corner near the swinging kitchen doors. I checked the name cards. 4 of my younger cousins, ranging from 9 to 15 years old. 1 aunt assigned to supervise them. And me. I was 26 years old. I had already built a cutting-edge tech company from the ground up and quietly become a multi-millionaire, yet my own mother had intentionally seated me at the kids' table. "You'll be much more comfortable over here, sweetheart," she whispered with an unnaturally bright smile before turning on her expensive heels to greet one of my wealthy uncles. The message couldn't have been more obvious. They didn't want the son without the prestigious medical career sitting with the adults, ruining the image they worked so hard to project. I was supposed to stay quiet, stay out of family photos, and pretend I belonged in the corner. Without saying a word, I walked over and took my seat between a 9-year-old cousin who immediately started kicking the table leg nonstop, and a 7-year-old who somehow managed to spill dark grape juice all over my shirt sleeve less than 5 minutes after I sat down. I calmly grabbed a linen napkin, wiped off the stain, and made myself one silent promise. This would be the very last time any of them ever treated me like this. Dinner moved along as servers brought out an extravagant four-course meal prepared by a private catering company that had reportedly charged more than $9,200 for the evening. Even though the two tables were in the same room, they felt worlds apart, separated by far more than 20 feet. At exactly 8:10 p.m., my father stood at the head of the main table. He picked up a silver dessert fork and tapped it against his crystal wine glass. The sharp ringing sound instantly silenced the room. "May I have everyone's attention?" he announced proudly, his voice filling the room as his chest swelled with confidence. "Tonight we're celebrating much more than 30 wonderful years of marriage with my incredible wife, Genevieve." He paused while everyone applauded politely. "We're also celebrating another major milestone for the Whitfield family legacy." The second he said that, my stomach tightened into a knot. I already knew exactly where this was headed. "As all of you know," he continued, "my son Julian has been doing extraordinary work in cardiothoracic surgery." Julian lowered his head slightly, wearing the perfectly rehearsed expression of humble confidence. This week, he officially accepted an invitation to serve as the keynote speaker at the International Medical Congress in Vienna this November. At only 35 years old, he'll become the youngest keynote speaker in the organization's history. The room exploded with applause. Several relatives jumped to their feet. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" from the main table, while everyone else enthusiastically joined in. My father looked like the proudest man alive. Julian stood, adjusted his expensive tailored jacket, hugged my father, and then embraced my mother, who wore the triumphant smile of someone convinced she'd won life's greatest competition. Once the applause finally settled and everyone returned to their seats, the trap I'd been expecting finally snapped shut. My father slowly turned toward me, his eyes locking onto mine across the gap between the two tables. A slow, calculated smile spread across his face. "Nathan," he called out sweetly, his voice dripping with fake warmth that carried effortlessly through the silent room. "Since we're all sharing our accomplishments tonight and celebrating success, why don't you tell everyone about your life? Have you achieved anything worth mentioning lately? Or are you still just relaxing at home?" Every head in the room immediately turned toward me. 18 pairs of eyes were suddenly fixed on my face. The silence that followed felt crushing. Even my 15-year-old cousin quietly scooted his chair farther away from me, almost like failure could somehow be contagious. Across the room, Julian watched me with that same smug, arrogant grin I'd seen 1,000 times before. My mouth had gone completely dry, and beneath the table I tightened my grip on the fabric of my pants. I could have kept quiet. I could have swallowed my pride, played the role they'd already written for me, and quietly answered, "Nothing to report, Dad." Instead, I met his eyes, kept my voice calm and steady, and revealed just a tiny piece of the truth. "I work full-time in fintech, Dad," I said confidently. "Fintech?" my father repeated, raising his eyebrows as a mocking smile slowly spread across his face. "Cryptocurrency?" my father said with a mocking grin. "You mean that fake internet money? That ridiculous nonsense?" "Not exactly," I replied without looking away from him. "I build decentralized blockchain security protocols." My father let out a loud, dismissive laugh and turned toward the rest of the family, practically inviting everyone to join in. "Blockchain? Give me a break, Nathan. That's not a real career. It's nothing but glorified gambling for lazy millennials who don't want to work an honest day in their lives." 3 of my uncles laughed right along with him, nodding as if he'd just delivered some profound truth. The only person who stayed silent was Uncle Desmond. His jaw was clenched so tightly, it looked like he might crack a tooth, and he stared at my father with pure disgust. "Correct me if I'm wrong," my father continued, raising his voice as he slowly stood to his feet. His face was turning a deep shade of red. "Isn't this whole decentralized finance thing basically one giant scam? One big Ponzi scheme?" "Ponzi's." "No," I answered calmly. "It's a legitimate global financial infrastructure built on secure, decentralized technology." "It's a joke," he exploded, slamming his fist onto the massive mahogany table so hard the silverware rattled and a wine glass nearly tipped over. "Let me make something perfectly clear, Nathan. We spent a fortune paying for your Ivy League medical education, and you threw all of it away. You walked out so you could sit around in a dark bedroom, wearing sweatpants and playing with imaginary coins on a computer." His voice grew louder with every sentence until he was practically shouting across the elegant dining room. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family's reputation? You were supposed to become a surgeon. Instead, you've turned into a parasite, wasting your life chasing digital fantasies." My mother leaned forward, speaking much more quietly than my father, but Every word carried a coldness that hit even harder. "We can't even tell our friends what you do, Nathan," she said, making sure everyone in the room could hear her. "Do you realize how embarrassing that is? Whenever people ask about our youngest son, we feel humiliated. You make us look like failures." My father pointed directly at me, his hand shaking with rage. "You are an absolute disgrace to the Whitfield name," he shouted, his voice echoing through the room. "3 generations of world-class doctors, and you waste your life staring at a computer screen. Get out of my house. Get out and don't come back." I refused to let a pathetic failure keep living under my roof for one more second. For what felt like forever, nobody moved. 16 relatives sat frozen in their chairs, silently watching a father disown his own son, and not one of them spoke up on my behalf. I quietly stood from the children's table, picked up my heavy wool coat, and walked toward the front door. Just as my hand reached the brass doorknob, I heard my mother whisper to Aunt Rosalind, "Let him go. He'll be back in less than a week begging us for money. He always comes crawling back." I stepped outside into the freezing night air, gently closed the door behind me, and walked down the quiet, tree-lined street without looking back. My hands never shook as I pulled my keys from my pocket and unlocked my midnight black Bentley Continental, a car worth more than many people's entire homes. I settled into the handcrafted leather driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away. 19 minutes later, I pulled into the secure underground garage beneath my own building in Center City. I skipped the main lobby, took the private elevator straight to the 46th floor, and unlocked the door to my 2,850-square-foot penthouse, a modern home I had purchased entirely with money I'd earned myself. I sat down on my $18,500 Milan sectional sofa, opened my laptop, and checked my inbox. Sitting at the top was a brand new email from the Forbes editorial team. The subject line immediately caught my attention. 30 under 30. Publication date confirmed. The email explained that my profile, biography, and the full story behind my financial success had been finalized and scheduled for publication on November 3rd at exactly 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time. I quietly closed the laptop and smiled as I looked around the peaceful silence of my home. My family believed I was nothing more than a parasite. In just a matter of days, they were about to learn who I really was. Update 2. The days after my public humiliation and expulsion from the Whitfield family passed in complete silence. On the second day, my younger brother Preston finally texted me, "Nathan, I'm really sorry about what Dad did at dinner, but I can't get involved. I've got my residency applications to worry about, and I can't risk Dad turning on me, too." I didn't waste my time answering. I deleted the conversation and moved on. On the third day, Julian uploaded a carefully curated collection of photos from the anniversary dinner to his public Instagram account. I had been completely erased from every single picture. His caption read, "Celebrating 30 years of excellence with our amazing family. So grateful for my parents' support as I prepare for my keynote speech in Vienna. #blessed #family legacy." While my family obsessed over social media appearances and carefully filtered images, my actual life was accelerating faster than they could possibly imagine. 11 days after that dinner, I walked into a sleek, glass-walled boardroom and finalized a major Series A funding agreement with one of the city's most aggressive venture capital firms. The investment added another $6.5 million directly into Vertex Chain's accounts. After the paperwork was signed, the firm's senior partner, a tough investor named Simone, looked me straight in the eyes and smiled. "Nathan," she said, "based on your growth metrics and user acquisition numbers, we're valuing Vertex Chain at $185 million. At this point, you're officially untouchable." I walked out of that building feeling like an entirely different man. I didn't need a medical degree to earn anyone's respect. The morning of November 3rd arrived cold and crystal clear. At exactly 6 a.m. Eastern Time, the Forbes homepage refreshed, and the annual 30 under 30 finance feature took over the front page. Right in the center was a professionally shot, high-resolution photo of me. Beneath it was the headline, "From medical school dropout to $41.6 million blockchain titan, meet Nathan Whitfield, the visionary behind Vertex Chain." The article perfectly told my story, explaining how I had walked away from one of the country's most prestigious medical paths to build a company in decentralized finance, transforming a $52,000 investment into a multi-million-dollar fortune. Less than 10 minutes after it went live, my phone started vibrating nonstop. Notifications poured in faster than I could read them. I ignored every single one because I wasn't interested in congratulations. I was waiting for the Whitfield family to realize what had just happened. Later, I learned exactly how my father discovered the article. Around 8 that morning, Dr. Marcus Whitfield was relaxing in the physician's lounge at his prestigious hospital, proudly telling a group of younger surgeons about Julian's upcoming keynote speech in Vienna. That's when Dr. Whitman, the chief of surgery, and one of the few people who outranked my father, walked into the room carrying an iPad. "Marcus," he said with a huge smile, "why on earth have you been hiding this from us? Your youngest son is on the front page of Forbes. He's built a massive tech company and he's worth over $40 million. My father looked down at the screen. He saw my picture. He read the headline. Then his eyes landed on the number, $41.6 million. According to one of the nurses who witnessed the moment, every bit of color disappeared from his face. His hand shook so badly he almost dropped the iPad. For years, he had been telling everyone at the hospital that I was an unemployed disappointment. Now his own boss was congratulating him on my success. At the same time, Julian was reportedly falling apart inside his apartment. His inbox was flooded with messages from former classmates and fellow surgeons sending him links to the Forbes article and asking if he could introduce them to his millionaire younger brother. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, my mother had gone into full panic mode. She posted a long emotional message on Facebook that was so fake it almost made me laugh. Words can't express how proud Marcus and I are of our youngest son, Nathan. When he made the difficult decision to leave medical school, we always believed he was destined for greatness in the technology industry. We proudly supported him through all those long nights of coding. We love you so much, Nathan. The problem was that she forgot one very important detail. Aunt Rosalind had been sitting at that anniversary dinner. And unlike the rest of the family, she couldn't stand hypocrisy. 35 minutes after my mother's post went live, Aunt Rosalind destroyed the entire performance with a single comment. She uploaded 4 screenshots from our private family group chat. They contained my mother's real messages from just 2 weeks earlier. "Nathan is an absolute parasite. He's a complete embarrassment to this family. Marcus finally threw him out during dinner. Thank God. Maybe now the ungrateful brat will learn what life is like without our money. He'll be begging us for help by Monday." Under the screenshots, Aunt Rosalind wrote one brutally simple sentence. "Supportive, Genevieve? You threw him out of your house 2 weeks ago because you hated his career. Stop lying to strangers for attention." The internet did the rest. Friends, acquaintances, and people from my parents' social circles piled into the comments and called my mother out for her lies. The backlash became so overwhelming that within 3 hours, she deleted her entire Facebook account. I decided to use my success to make one final statement, and I knew exactly where it would hurt the most. 4 weeks later, my company's charitable foundation announced a $5 million donation to the university I had once attended. The agreement included one legally binding condition: not a single dollar could be transferred to its medical school. Then I followed it with an even bigger blow. I donated $2.8 million worth of state-of-the-art medical equipment to a severely underfunded public hospital across the river, instead of my father's elite hospital, which happened to be in the middle of a desperate fundraising campaign. The official press release read, "Vertex Chain CEO Nathan Whitfield donates $2.8 million to advance equal access to public health care." According to several people familiar with the situation, my father's board of directors was furious. Because of the way he had treated his own son, the hospital had lost one of the largest donations it could have received. That was the moment their pride finally cracked. 6 weeks after they had thrown me out, my building's head doorman, Mr. Donovan, called my penthouse through the intercom. "Mr. Whitfield, there's a couple downstairs claiming to be your parents. Would you like me to call security?" A slow smile crossed my face. "No," I answered calmly. "Send them up." A few minutes later, my parents stepped into the foyer of my penthouse. They stopped almost immediately, looking around in stunned silence as they took in the size and luxury of the place. Or, for the first time in my life, they looked completely out of place. "Nathan," my mother began with a shaky smile, "your home is absolutely beautiful, sweetheart. Why are you here?" I asked flatly. My father cleared his throat, looking older and far more tired than I remembered. "Nathan, son, we need to talk. These public donations and all this attention, it's reflecting poorly on the family. We'd like to put everything behind us. We'd like you to start coming to family dinners again. We need to present a united front." "A united front?" I repeated slowly. "A month ago, you stood in front of 16 relatives and screamed at me to get out and stay out. You called me a parasite. We were only trying to help you," my mother said smoothly. "It was tough love." "You weren't trying to help me, Genevieve," I replied, deliberately refusing to call her mom. She flinched the instant I said her name. "The only reason you're standing here today is because my net worth is larger than everything you've built in your entire careers, and my success has made your failure as parents impossible to hide." You're not here to apologize. You're here because you're trying to repair your image. For a split second, my father slipped back into his old self. I'm still your father, he snapped. You owe this family a basic level of respect. I slowly placed my glass on the marble countertop. The sharp sound echoed through the room. Then I looked him directly in the eyes. For the first time in my life, I didn't see anger looking back at me. I saw fear. He finally understood that he no longer had any control over me. I don't owe you a damn thing, Marcus, I said quietly. You made your choice the night you threw me out. You chose Julian. You chose your precious family legacy. Well, you still have it. Keep it. And if either of you ever shows up at my home without an invitation again, my attorneys will handle it. Now get out of my house and stay out. Without another word, they turned around and walked out. In less than 10 minutes, 30 years of manipulation and control came to an end. For the first time in my life, I was completely free. 7 months later, I stood beneath bright stage lights as I announced the Nathan Whitfield Innovation Scholarship, a $5 million program created to help talented students pursue groundbreaking technology without sacrificing their dreams. After the ceremony, a young woman named Priya approached me with tears in her eyes. She thanked me for giving her the chance to stay in school after her parents threatened to cut off her tuition because she refused to become a lawyer. I smiled and told her the one lesson it had taken me years to learn. You don't need your parents' permission to build the life you want. You only need the courage to believe in yourself. Because in the end, the greatest revenge against a narcissistic family isn't yelling, arguing, or proving them wrong. It's becoming so successful, so fulfilled, and so genuinely happy that their opinions no longer have any power over your life.